They rejected her SEAL application not once, not twice, but 3 times. Every letter carried the same cold verdict. Women do not meet the standard. But when terrorists stormed Fort Bragg, turning one of America's most secure training facilities into a battlefield, the impossible happened. With hundreds of lives hanging by a thread, Marissa Kane was handed a Barrett 50 caliber and told to hold the line. 15 targets, 15 shots, 0 misses. In less than an hour, she silenced doubt, rewrote history, and forced the very system that rejected her to recognize her worth. And what came next would not only change her future, it would shake the foundations of military history itself. Staff Sergeant Marissa Kane had the kind of record that should have opened every door in the military. Her service jacket read like a checklist of perfection. 3 combat deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq, expert marksman ratings on every weapon system the Army fielded, and a physical fitness score that outpaced many of her male counterparts. She could run a 5-mile course in full gear without breaking stride. She could carry wounded comrades out of fire zones when others had collapsed from exhaustion. And yet, each time she reached for the next step in her career, the fabled Navy SEALs, the door slammed shut in her face. She applied not once. She applied not twice, but 3 times. And 3 times the answer came back the same way. A plain envelope, an impersonal letter, a cold verdict. Women do not meet the standard. To Marissa, the words were more than a rejection. They were a declaration that no matter how much she had bled, sweated, or proven herself in battle, the institution had already decided her ceiling. She wasn't being judged on her skills, her discipline, or her record. She was being judged on biology. The official reasoning was always clinical, wrapped in bureaucratic language. Female candidates do not possess the necessary physiological endurance. The program is designed for the male combat frame. It is not discrimination, but biological reality. That was the line repeated in hushed interviews, in curt memos, in letters signed with detached authority. In truth, it was a wall built on centuries of assumption that women could serve, but only in support, never in the sharpest edge of combat. For Marissa, it stung, not because she doubted herself, but because she knew how false those assumptions were. On the battlefield, bullets didn't care whether you were male or female. What mattered was whether you could move, fight, and think under fire. And she had done all of it, proven it again and again. Yet the SEAL Trident, that small golden pin that represented entry into America's most elite brotherhood, was kept behind a locked gate guarded by prejudice disguised as policy. This wasn't the first time in history someone like Marissa had been told no long before being allowed to prove yes. History is filled with women who stood at the edge of greatness and were denied entry until crisis forced the truth into the light. Think of the women pilots of World War II, the WASP program, who trained, flew, and delivered aircraft across the Atlantic, only to have their contributions buried in silence for decades. They weren't considered combat capable, even as they ferried planes through storms and enemy-patrolled skies. Think of Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, the first female physician in America, told countless times that medicine was not for women. She had to disguise her application to even be considered. Once admitted, she graduated first in her class, proving the lie in one stroke. Think of Katherine Johnson, the mathematician whose calculations helped launch Apollo missions, but who had to fight just to be in the room where the chalkboard stood. Without her, the astronauts might never have come home, but for years she was hidden behind the system's reluctance to see her as equal. Marissa Kane stood in that same lineage, a soldier who had every credential, every piece of proof, but was dismissed because policy clung to biology as its excuse. What makes these stories sting, and what makes Marissa's story resonate, is the irony that the same system that denies someone often comes begging for them in its darkest hour. It is only when institutions are pushed to the brink, when chaos strikes, when the polished plans collapse, that they turn to the very people they once overlooked. That is the paradox of silent professionals. They don't seek recognition, yet recognition eventually has no choice but to find them. For now, though, Marissa stood in limbo. She wore the uniform proudly, trained soldiers diligently, and executed her duties flawlessly. But inside, she carried the unshakable weight of rejection letters that had told her she would never stand among the SEALs, never be considered their equal, never carry the trident she had dreamed of since her earliest days in the Army. And yet rejection did not break her. It sharpened her. Each no became fuel, each letter a reminder that skill mattered more than approval. She kept training when no one was watching, refining her marksmanship, studying tactics, building endurance. She refused to let the words of policy dictate the reality of her ability. Because somewhere deep down, Marissa Kane knew, history has a way of bending when crisis comes. And when that moment arrived, when the world demanded more than rules, she would be ready. The morning at Fort Bragg had started like any other. Rows of Army Rangers were scattered across the training grounds, drilling under the southern sun. Vehicles rumbled in formation, radios crackled with standard exercises, and officers moved briskly between buildings. On the surface, it was routine, a day indistinguishable from dozens before. But lurking inside that normalcy was a plan months in the making. The insurgents didn't storm the base in dramatic fashion. They walked in, disguised as contractors, orange safety vests, clipboards in hand, toolboxes clutched like props. They passed checkpoints with forged badges and borrowed confidence. To the guards, they were just maintenance crews scheduled to inspect infrastructure. To the base, they were invisible, background noise in a place where contractors came and went daily. Behind those disguises, however, lay a ruthless intent. Concealed inside toolboxes were compact rifles broken into parts. Rolled blueprints hid maps of the facility's weak points. And beneath their practiced smiles was the cold certainty of men sent to carry out a strike designed not just to kill, but to humiliate. By the time the first shots rang out, it was too late. Automatic fire tore through the administrative building at 09:17 hours. At first, some thought it was a drill, an unusually loud exercise. But when bodies collapsed in the corridors and blood pooled across polished floors, the truth roared in with terrifying clarity. Within minutes, chaos swallowed Fort Bragg whole. Smoke alarms shrieked. Sirens wailed across the compound. Soldiers scrambled for cover while officers barked orders into radios already clogged with frantic chatter. The insurgents moved with precision, cutting down personnel as they advanced, securing choke points and laying down suppressive fire that pinned American troops inside their own facilities. By 09:30, the casualty count was climbing. 12 American soldiers were already dead, 18 wounded, and the attackers weren't slowing down. Their objective soon became clear: the command bunker. On that day, Fort Bragg was hosting not just U.S. Special Operations personnel, but also senior NATO officials, observers from allied nations evaluating joint readiness. If the insurgents reached that bunker and killed or captured those figures, the psychological shock would ripple far beyond America. It would undermine confidence in NATO's unity, question U.S. security capabilities, and hand the enemy a propaganda victory of incalculable scale. In the middle of this spiraling disaster, Marissa Kane had been conducting rifle training at Range 47. Her first warning was the sound of distant gunfire: rapid, sustained, wrong. Then came the base-wide alarm, followed by a chilling transmission over the radio. All personnel, this is command. Hostile forces confirmed inside the installation. Seek cover. This is not a drill. Her trainees froze, eyes wide. Marissa didn't. She secured their weapons, pushed them toward cover, and sprinted toward the source of the chaos. This was no longer about training. This was survival. As she crossed the grounds, gunfire echoed like thunderclaps. Smoke rose from the logistics building. A Humvee lay overturned, its crew motionless beside it. Every sight tightened the knot in her chest, but also sharpened her resolve. Then her radio crackled again, this time with urgency that cut through the noise. Foster, negative. Kane, report to the range tower immediately. We need every qualified marksman available for immediate response. The sniper tower, elevated ground with commanding sight lines over much of the complex. It was normally used for training long-range shots, but now it was a lifeline, a perch from which someone might turn the tide. And at that moment, someone meant her. Inside the tower, senior officers had gathered over digital displays glowing with red markers, each one representing an enemy position. Colonel Davis, face grim, turned as Marissa arrived. Sergeant Major Thompson handed her a Barrett 50 caliber without ceremony. 15 confirmed hostiles, Davis said, voice clipped. Ranges 600 to 1,300 meters. Every one of them is blocking evacuation or pinning our people down. If they reach the bunker, it's over. The implication hung in the air. Every sniper on base was either deployed, wounded, or trapped. That left her, the soldier whose dream had been rejected 3 times. This is where the irony of institutions reveals itself. For years they had told her, women do not meet the standard. And yet when the walls were caving in, the standard no longer mattered. What mattered was whether someone could hold the line. This is the unpredictability of war. It doesn't wait for policies, it doesn't honor tradition, and it doesn't care about prejudice. It exposes truth in raw, unfiltered form. In those moments, titles, genders, and bureaucratic barriers collapse. What remains is capability. And here was the paradox. The same system that had closed the door on Marissa Kane now placed the fate of Fort Bragg, hundreds of lives and NATO's confidence squarely in her hands. She set up the Barrett on the bipod, adjusted her scope, and checked the wind through the open window. Downrange, smoke obscured some targets, but others were clear. Insurgents positioned on rooftops, in windows, behind vehicles, rifles trained on kill zones where American soldiers lay trapped. Her heart pounded, but her mind was steady. She had trained for this, alone, in silence, when no one cared to watch. Now, every repetition, every denied chance, every rejection letter had led her to this moment. 15 targets, 15 shots, 0 room for failure. And with one squeeze of the trigger, Marissa Kane would begin rewriting the very history that had once refused to include her. The Barrett M82A1 lay across the table like a piece of industrial art. Long, heavy, and merciless. Weighing nearly 30 pounds, it wasn't a rifle you carried casually. It was a weapon designed to reach out across distances where most shooters saw nothing but haze. For Marissa Kane, it was both familiar and formidable. She had trained with it in Afghanistan, but never under conditions like these. 15 hostile targets scattered across Fort Bragg, ranges from 600 to over 1,300 meters, all needing to be eliminated in less than 47 minutes. It wasn't just an assignment, it was the kind of test that bordered on impossible, one that even elite snipers might hesitate to accept. But there was no hesitation here. Failure meant the insurgents would break through to the NATO command bunker. And if that happened, the fallout wouldn't just be bodies, it would be headlines across the globe, a blow to American credibility that no spin could repair. Marissa slid into position behind the Barrett. The scope gleamed faintly in the dim light of the tower, its magnification pulling distant rooftops into sharp relief. The officers stood behind her in tense silence, their gazes flicking between the digital tactical map and the woman prone on the platform. For years, they had said women do not meet the standard. Now their survival depended on the one woman they had dismissed. She began with the fundamentals, because long-range shooting, despite the myths, is less about pulling the trigger and more about managing dozens of variables that can betray even the best marksman. Wind. At 1,000 meters, even a gentle crosswind can push a bullet several feet off target. Marissa studied the tree line, the way smoke drifted, the flutter of torn banners near a collapsed building. Each detail whispered clues about the invisible currents of air that could make or break a shot. Elevation. Some targets were above her, others below. A bullet fired upward climbs differently than one fired downward, the pull of gravity shifting the trajectory. She scribbled quick calculations in the margin of her notebook. Compensations born of experience, not guesswork. Breathing. Her body itself was an obstacle. A heartbeat at the wrong moment could throw the crosshairs inches off target, enough to miss entirely at 1,000 meters. So she slowed her rhythm, steady and mechanical. Inhale, half exhale, hold, squeeze. It was a meditation as much as a technique. The officers behind her might have seen only a soldier lying prone with a rifle, but in reality she was a mathematician, a meteorologist, and a psychologist all at once, reading variables, balancing equations, and suppressing doubt. Here's the truth about sniping. It is as much psychology as it is muscle memory. The rifle will not forgive hesitation. The mind cannot afford panic. Every shot is a marriage between technical mastery and internal stillness. That's what institutions never understood about soldiers like Marissa. They measured physical standards, push-ups, pull-ups, load carries, but they underestimated the quiet steel of psychology. They overlooked the ability to regulate heart rate under fire, to process information at speed while chaos raged, to trust years of training when seconds mattered. And this is where the so-called hidden professionals shine. They are the ones who train in silence, without recognition, often denied opportunities, but who keep going because discipline is not dependent on applause. Their reward is not a medal, but readiness. Their moment rarely comes until it does. And when it does, the world sees what the system refused to. Marissa's eyes narrowed on her first target, an insurgent perched on the roof of the administrative building, a scoped rifle trained on the approach route. Range, 847 meters. Wind, left to right, moderate. Correction, 8 inches left. She adjusted her scope, exhaled, and squeezed. The 50 caliber round cracked like thunder, tearing through the air. 1.2 seconds later, the target collapsed. One down. Her radio clicked alive. Target 1 neutralized, she reported calmly, already shifting to her next. Target 2, second-story logistics window, 1,127 meters. The insurgent was covering the helicopter landing zone where medics were attempting to pull out the wounded. The shot had to be precise. Too high and she'd miss. Too low and she risked hitting friendly forces. Marissa calculated, adjusted, waited for the insurgent to lean forward into the window frame, and fired. 1.3 seconds later, impact. 2 down. Each engagement was a test of endurance, not physical, but mental. She wasn't racing against a clock so much as against human error. A slip of concentration, a misread of wind, a rush of adrenaline, any of those could unravel everything. Targets 3 through 8 fell in similar fashion. One at 200 meters moving across open ground, dropped mid-stride. Another hiding behind partial cover, neutralized in the brief moment he exposed his shoulder. At 1,187 meters, her farthest shot yet, she fired into fading light, compensating for every ounce of drag and gravity, and struck true. Behind her, the officers exchanged glances of disbelief. They had expected competence. They hadn't expected perfection. And yet, perfection was what Marissa demanded of herself. Not because she sought glory, but because this was her one chance to prove that the years of silent training had meant something. Every letter of rejection was in her mind as she reloaded, recalculated, and recentered her scope. Each shot was an answer to the phrase, "Women do not meet the standard." There is a saying in the sniper community, "Slow is smooth, smooth is fast." It means discipline trumps speed, patience beats panic. Marissa embodied that mantra. To the world, it might look like she was shooting bullets. In reality, she was delivering arguments, 15 of them, one after the other, against the very prejudice that had defined her career. By the 20th minute, half the insurgents were down. By the 40th, only a handful remained. The tide of battle had shifted. Soldiers once pinned behind cover began advancing again, emboldened by the unseen protector in the tower. Lives were being saved not by a squad, not by a platoon, but by one woman who had been told 3 times she wasn't enough. And here lies the ultimate irony. The impossible assignment they had handed her wasn't just about eliminating 15 targets. It was about rewriting belief, about showing, in real time, that competence has no gender. When the 47th minute closed, Marissa Kane was still steady behind her rifle. 15 targets, 15 shots, 0 misses. What she had done was more than defend Fort Bragg. She had forced history to take notice. The tower was silent, but Marissa Kane's world was filled with noise. Wind tugging at her uniform, distant explosions rumbling across the base, and the rapid thud of her own heartbeat steadying into rhythm. She had 47 minutes, 15 confirmed hostiles, and a single Barrett M82A1 resting on its bipod. The impossible was now her responsibility. Target 1, precision under pressure. Through her scope, the first target snapped into focus. A sniper perched on the roof of the administrative building, rifle poised to cut down any American soldier attempting to move toward the command bunker. Range, 847 meters. Crosswind tugged left to right. Marissa slowed her breathing. Inhale, exhale, hold. She adjusted 8 inches left, squeezed the trigger. The .50 caliber cracked like thunder, echoing across the compound. The insurgent dropped instantly, body slumping across the rooftop. The radio clicked alive. Target 1 neutralized. It was the confirmation the officers behind her needed, but for Marissa, it was only the beginning. 1 down, 14 to go. Target 5, pushing human limits. By the time she reached her 5th target, the mission had escalated to the edge of possibility. The insurgent had positioned himself at a staggering 1,787 meters, nearly the maximum effective range of the Barrett. Beyond that distance, even the tiniest error in wind calculation could throw a bullet off by feet. The man was crouched behind a half-collapsed wall, confident that no one could touch him from such a distance. He was wrong. Marissa studied the drifting smoke, the swaying treetops, the way debris fluttered near the ground. She calculated corrections, dialed in her scope, and felt time slow. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The recoil thundered through her shoulder, the round tearing through the sky. 1.5 seconds later, the insurgent toppled backward, the wall offering no protection from physics and precision. The officers behind her exchanged looks. 1,087 meters wasn't just a shot. It was a statement. Target 9, threading the needle. The 9th target nearly defied belief. Pinned in a basement window of the supply building, the insurgent had chosen a position with a firing slit barely 12 inches wide. From 1,089 meters away, the shot was like trying to thread a needle in a hurricane. Marissa steadied herself. She calculated downward angle, factored bullet drop, and waited. The insurgent shifted, exposing just enough of his shoulder through the slit. Exhale, hold, squeeze. The round punched through the opening cleanly. Silence followed, then a slumped shadow collapsing behind the window frame. 9 down, 6 left. The last 3 insurgents realized their mission was failing. Smoke, confusion, and the crack of a hidden rifle had turned their precision strike into a massacre of their own. They broke from cover, sprinting across open ground toward the eastern perimeter. These were the hardest shots of all, moving targets over 100 meters away, running full speed. Even elite snipers often hesitate to take such shots, the calculations shifting by the second. But Marissa was calm. For target 13, she led the man by 3 body lengths, squeezed, and dropped him mid-stride. Target 14 zigzagged, desperate to dodge the invisible hunter. Marissa tracked his pattern, predicted his next pivot, and fired. He spun into the dirt. The 15th insurgent was fastest, sprinting harder than the others, almost to the tree line. Marissa adjusted elevation, compensated for wind, and held her breath. Time slowed as the man's figure crossed her crosshairs. The trigger broke. The bullet tore through the air. And at 1,356 meters, the last insurgent crumpled to the ground. 15 shots, 15 hits, 0 misses. When the last target fell, a heavy silence blanketed the tower. The gunfire across the base slowed, then stopped. Soldiers who had been pinned behind walls and vehicles began to rise cautiously, realizing the fields of fire had gone quiet. One by one, American troops advanced, clearing areas that moments earlier had been kill zones. From the tower, Marissa remained prone, rifle still trained outward, breath steady. Her body was tense, but her mind was clear. The impossible assignment was complete. What Marissa Kane accomplished that day was not just tactical, it was historical. Military historians often reference the legendary sniper feats of the past. Simo Häyhä, the Finnish marksman nicknamed the White Death, who in the winter of 1939 recorded over 500 confirmed kills using nothing but iron sights. His story was one of endurance, silence, and an unshakable will. Or Chris Kyle, the U.S. Navy SEAL whose 4 tours in Iraq made him America's most lethal sniper, credited with over 160 confirmed kills. Kyle became a symbol of modern precision warfare, his shots saving countless soldiers in ambushes and firefights. Marissa Kane's performance at Fort Bragg deserves to stand beside them. Unlike Heha, she did not have months in the snow. Unlike Kyle, she did not have the support of a SEAL platoon around her. She had 47 minutes, a single Barrett, and the weight of institutional rejection pressing on her shoulders. Her achievement wasn't just 15 kills, it was 15 perfect kills. No misses, no collateral damage. Each round placed with mathematical certainty under the most hostile conditions imaginable. And perhaps most remarkable of all, she was never meant to be there. The letters told her she had no place among the elite. Policy had written her out before the battle even began. Yet history doesn't read rejection letters. It reads results. For the soldiers on the ground, Marissa's marksmanship was not an abstract feat. It was survival. Men and women who would have been cut down found themselves alive because someone in the tower refused to miss. The NATO officials, once moments from capture, were escorted safely out of the compound. Fort Bragg, the very heart of special operations training, had been saved by the one soldier the system had pushed aside. 15 shots, 15 names erased from the insurgents' roster, 15 answers to the cold phrase, "Women do not meet the standard." Marissa Kane did not speak when the last target fell. She didn't need to. The rifle had spoken for her, and in that silence, the message carried further than words ever could. One woman, one rifle, 47 minutes, and history itself forced to listen. When the final echoes of gunfire dissolved into silence, Fort Bragg no longer resembled a military training ground. It looked like a scarred battlefield. Smoke drifted across shattered buildings, vehicles burned at odd angles, and the once ordered rhythm of drills had given way to a stunned, uneasy calm. Up in the sniper tower, Marissa Kane remained steady, her cheek pressed against the stock of the Barrett M82A1. Only when the all-clear came over the radio did she ease her finger from the trigger. 15 targets, 15 shots, 0 misses. Her body ached from the recoil, but her focus had never faltered. Behind her, senior officers stood frozen, their eyes fixed on the tactical display. Red enemy markers had vanished one by one until nothing remained. What they had just witnessed wasn't luck, and it wasn't coincidence. It was precision, discipline, and willpower, delivered flawlessly by the very soldier they had deemed unfit. Colonel Davis broke the silence, his voice low. "Every detail is recorded. This engagement will be studied for years." Sergeant Major Thompson, once skeptical of her place in elite circles, shook his head slowly. "She just did what half our best snipers would have hesitated to attempt. 15 for 15. That's not standard. That's beyond it." Marissa didn't respond. She didn't need to. The results spoke louder than any argument she could make. Hours later, in a secure briefing room, her performance was reviewed line by line. The same personnel file that had once been stamped with rejection was now being read with new eyes. Expert marksman, perfect fitness scores, 3 combat deployments, commendations. Everything they had overlooked was now undeniable. At 1900 hours, the secure line connected to the Pentagon. A vice admiral appeared on screen, his voice steady but carrying an edge of awe. "Staff Sergeant Kane," he said, "your actions today have been evaluated at the highest levels. What you accomplished at Fort Bragg has implications beyond this base. Effective immediately, you are invited to report to Naval Special Warfare Command for SEAL evaluation. No conditions, no exceptions. You have already proven you meet the standard." The words hung heavy in the room. For Marissa, the rejection letters replayed in her mind. Cold, clinical verdicts declaring she would never qualify. Now the very institution that shut her out was opening its doors, not out of charity, but out of necessity. Her reply was simple. "Yes, sir, I'll be ready." Her invitation was more than personal vindication. It marked a turning point. For decades, arguments against women in elite combat roles leaned on biology, averages, and tradition. Those policies had not measured individuals, they had measured assumptions. Marissa's flawless performance cracked that shield. She demonstrated that competence cannot be confined to categories. War does not pause to ask gender. It asks only, "Can you do the job?" On that day, Marissa Kane had answered with 15 undeniable truths. This is how institutions change. Often, not through debate rooms or policy papers, but through moments of crisis when reality outpaces belief. Her story became a case study in the military's slow, uneven path toward gender integration, proof that sometimes the strongest walls are invisible and the sharpest weapons are perseverance and preparation. For the soldiers who survived because of her, Marissa wasn't just a sniper, she was a lifeline. For the officers who reviewed her record, she was a challenge to their assumptions. And for those who had once whispered that women do not meet the standard, she was now the very definition of it. She had broken steel, the rifles, the insurgents, the threat itself. But she had also broken something more enduring, the unseen barrier of disbelief. In years to come, her name would be spoken not only in training manuals, but in quiet conversations among young recruits, male and female alike, who wondered if they too might rise above the limitations placed on them. Marissa Kane left the tower that evening, not with celebration, but with the calm of someone who had finally been heard. She had not chased recognition, but recognition had found her. And in that moment, the impossible became undeniable. Marissa Kane's story is more than a tale of bullets and battlefields. It is a mirror held up to our own lives today. In modern America, many still face closed doors, not because they lack ability, but because of labels, assumptions, or traditions that refuse to move. Yet as Marissa proved, one moment of truth can tear down years of doubt. Excellence does not ask permission, it speaks for itself. Her 15 flawless shots are not only a military triumph, but a metaphor for all of us. Maybe your target isn't on a rooftop. It's the job you've been told you're not qualified for, the dream others say is unrealistic, or the voice inside whispering that you don't belong. The lesson is simple. When the moment comes, preparation and courage can rewrite the story. And here's the question I leave with you. If one woman with a rifle can shatter both steel and invisible barriers, what barriers could we, as a society, break if we stopped underestimating people before they have a chance to prove themselves? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you believe institutions change only when crisis forces them, or can we choose to change earlier? Share your reflections in the comments. I read everyone. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If it moved you, if you believe in hidden heroes and untold strength, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need encouragement today. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are not just about the past, they're about the future we dare to create together.